Hello everyone, and welcome to my first video delving into the world of hypothetical card design in Disney Lorcana. For this video, I've created several of my own Lorcana cards that showcase 5 designs that I think could be great additions to the game. A brief disclaimer before we get started, none of the cards in this video are real, they are all just examples of what new mechanics could look like. So without further ado, let's dive in. First up is a simple design that I think is the most likely to be added to Lorcana: Equipment. Equipment is a card design that is frequently included in TCGs due to its simple but fun and effective nature. You start by putting the equipment into play, then pay some amount of resources in order to attach it to a designated game piece. This action is cleanly represented by overlaying the equipment on top of another card. Oftentimes, equipment cards are weapons, armor, potions, or something of the sort that provides a bonus or other beneficial effect for your cards. Equipment can also be designated to give punishing effects when equipped to an opposing game piece. With much of the groundwork having already been laid, adding equipment shouldn't be difficult and would probably look something like this. In Magic, equipment cards are subtypes of artifacts, so adding an equipment subtype to Lorcana's item cards doesn't seem far-fetched. Ravensburger has already established that they intend to make cards that benefit from item cards. However, a majority of items in the first chapter are relatively safe and underwhelming design-wise. I think equipment items could be the next step in giving legs to this strategy instead of powering up the quality of basic items outright. Second on our list is a relatively safe design inspired by a conversation I had last week. Check out Flick, Bug Genius. This is a card I designed to introduce temporary inkwell acceleration. Playing this on your first turn will allow you to play a 3-cost card on your second turn, and paired with subsequent acceleration would let you power out some powerful threats early on. While Flick is a form of ramp, the ink added is only usable on the turn that you use Flick's ability, so I think it fits better in Amber rather than Sapphire, where your inkwell acceleration is permanent. It's likely that once exerted, Flick will get challenged right away, so knowing when to utilize his ability is important. This trade-off makes Flick almost self-balancing, and I think he could be introduced to the game right away and be fine. Next up is a mechanic that is near and dear to my heart: reanimation. 2 of my favorite things to do in card games are putting huge threats into play without paying their costs, and bringing cards back from the dead, and it just so happens that Reanimator effects do both. Reanimator strategies are defined by bringing cards back from the dead at a discount, and although it was coined by the Magic community, it's a relatively common TCG mechanic. Here's the card I designed around this mechanic. Healing Incantation is a relatively safe design as it requires some number of characters to be banished before it comes substantially discounted. But generally speaking, it would add a lot to the mid-range archetype just to have direct character recursion without warping the core of the game. Mid-range matchups involve a lot of resource management, so being the player that can set up a turn with efficient challenges and then cast a discounted healing incantation for a big target could drastically change the game. Also, cards like Ransack that currently see 0 competitive play would gain tremendous equity right away in the Steel Emerald Reanimator decks, along with the other card draw and discard effects. The archetype would be based around drawing new cards and dumping your big threats, then using your characters to challenge and clear the board, then bring back bigger threats from the banish pile ahead of curve. Another way to take advantage of the banish pile would be cards like this. Barrel of Gems is a high-quality item that introduces repeatable card draw attached to an item. It can be played, then activated, then brought back later when you have additional resources. It can also be discarded if need be, and still be used later on. I think a card like Barrel of Gems would be a great step forward in making item-centric decks better. On a personal level, reanimation is the mechanic that I'd most like to see added to Lorcana, but introducing it would also likely require a new zone be added as well: Exile. These types of strategies are often powerful, and require a way for other strategies to combat them effectively. Cards that exile the graveyard in Magic are a very important part of the competitive metagame for this reason. Currently, Magic Broom is the only card in Lorcana that can remove a card from the banish pile by shuffling it back into the deck. This is fine for now because we only have a few cards that return actions to our hands, but if you start mixing in reanimation spells and cards that can be recurred from the banish zone, there needs to be a more effective way to, for lack of a better term, remove them from play. Something like this possibly. Either way, I think adding reanimation is still doable, but likely farther down the road. Moving on, let's talk about searching. Search effects are another common mechanic that play a prominent role in many card games, including Magic, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Pokemon, One Piece, and more. Despite being widely included, I'm not surprised that Lorcana hasn't implemented search effects yet, as the first chapter is a base-level introductory set, and searching tends to be a more complex mechanic for multiple reasons, which we'll get to a bit later. First, let's take a look at two examples of what search effects in Lorcana could look like. Wally, while likely a tad bit overtuned in his current form, would be the type of card that item decks really need to be a player in the metagame. Searching out an item can be an extra ink, or just what you need in that moment. Either way, it's great. Then we have something like this, which adds a new dimension to deck building, and makes an opponent really think twice before banishing it. I was inspired to make this based on an old Yu-Gi-Oh! Favorite, Mystic Tomato. Now, I mentioned before there are downsides to search effects. The main downside is the time requirement. Each time you or your opponent play a search effect, some amount of time is spent considering the search target, while the deck must be picked through to locate it. After selection, searching is followed up with a good shuffle and cut. While it may seem incremental, games of competitive Lorcana are already frequently going to time without searching and shuffling. So if you add in search, shuffle, cuts, I'd expect this trend of draws to become even worse. The second issue is that shuffling 60 cards is hard. It's easy to forget that Lorcana in its current form is designed to appeal to kids and those who are new to TCGs. While playing tabletop Lorcana with my wife, who's never played a TCG before, it occurred to me just how difficult shuffling can be. It requires practice, and for some, it could be a barrier that they just don't want to deal with. All that being said, search effects, while executed properly, add a whole new dimension to a game and really break up the repetition of draw, play, go. It also enables more innovative deck building, where you can play 1 to 2 copies of niche cards that help in certain situations, but are too narrow overall to include the maximum amount of. And now we've reached the final card design on my list, and it's my personal favorite, inspired by field spells from Yu-Gi-Oh! Here's my concept for Worlds. Worlds introduce iconic locations that affect players in unique ways. The visit mechanic is the key word that would appear on the card to indicate the world effect to put into play. I chose Nightmare Before Christmas as a starting point for this, since Jack is a dynamic character and his personalities lend themselves to easy synergy with the world that he's in. Here's what it might look like. Jack, Curious Traveler, allows you to visit either Halloween Town or Christmas Town, with your choice becoming the current world. Since worlds affect both players, I balanced it by making their effects occur at the end of each player's turn. This way, the player who sets the world will get to utilize its effect first on their following turn, but their opponent has an opportunity then right after. You'll also notice that Halloween Town and Christmas Town also introduce tokens, which are temporary game pieces. When used, they banish themselves, but don't go to the banish pile like the real game pieces would. Tokens are a common mechanic in many TCGs, but I haven't seen them be introduced to Lorcana quite yet, although I think they would be a perfectly fine inclusion. The final piece of the world puzzle are cards that gain abilities based on what world you're visiting. Take these two versions of Jack for example. Both versions allow you to shift using Traveler Jack, and then follow up with a static ability that activates depending on the world. Jack Pumpkin King, for example, grants your other characters +1 strength and ward if you're visiting Halloween Town. Holiday Imposter Jack grants +1 willpower and your characters gain exert to draw a card if you're visiting Christmas Town. Overall, world effects land in this final spot on my list because they're the least likely to be implemented in the game, but I think that they would add a lot to Lorcana. Disney has so many iconic locations, and to not do anything with them would be a shame. Just imagine Aladdin and Jasmine cards that gain extra abilities from visiting Agrabah or the Cave of Wonders. The possibilities are really endless, and I really hope that we get something along these lines. So what do you think of the ideas that I've presented? What mechanics would you like to see added to Lorcana? Let me know in the comments, and I'll be sure to respond to each one, and if I like your idea enough, I might even make a custom card for it. Thanks again for watching, and if you've made it this far, please be sure to like and subscribe. I'll see you all next time.